The vast observation deck of Galactic Council Station ZX-789 hummed with activity as Senior Administrator Day stood before the massive holographic display. His four tentacles twitched rhythmically as he studied the crude vessels moving through the newly discovered solar system. The ships were ungainly things, built with what appeared to be primitive nuclear propulsion and basic ion drives. "Fascinating," he muttered, his outer eyes focusing on a particularly large vessel while his inner eyes tracked the smaller craft swarming around it. The ship designation read ISS Unity, and its blocky construction made him wince. No self-respecting spacefaring race would build something so inelegant. His assistant Han approached quietly, datapad in hand. "Sir, we've completed the initial analysis of their communication networks. They call their world Earth and themselves humans. They appear to be in the early stages of space exploration." Day's skin rippled with amusement. "Look at these vessels, Han. No quantum shielding, no gravity manipulation, not even basic antimatter containment. They're still using chemical rockets for planetary launches." He gestured at the hologram with one tentacle. "Their most advanced ships take months to reach their own satellite colonies on Mars. Should we classify them as a pre-spacefaring civilization?" Han asked, his scales shifting to a professional shade of green. No. They've achieved faster-than-light travel, even if it's crude. That automatically qualifies them for contact under Council Directive 7249. Day expanded the hologram, showing the entire solar system. "What interests me is their military presence. Look at these orbital platforms. Defensive installations, but primitive ones." Han studied the data scrolling across his pad. "Their military vessels seem overbuilt, sir. The hull thickness alone exceeds standard specifications by 300%. Wasteful design," Day said dismissively. "They clearly don't understand the principles of efficient space combat. Those ships would be too slow to engage any modern vessel." He paused, considering the implications, though that's to be expected from a species that's barely left their gravity well. The observation deck's doors slid open with a soft hiss as Junior Administrator Kai entered, her ceremonial robes floating gracefully around her. "Sir, the Council has reviewed your preliminary report. They've authorized first contact procedures." Day's skin flushed with pleasure. This would be his 47th first contact mission, and they had all ended successfully. These humans would make perfect Protectorate members, primitive enough to need guidance, but advanced enough to be useful. "Excellent. Prepare the diplomatic vessel Eternal Wisdom for departure. We'll need the standard first contact package, cultural exchange data, basic technology grants, and the Protectorate agreement." He turned to Han. "Have the translation matrices been updated with their languages?" "Yes, sir. We've analyzed what they call English, Mandarin, and Spanish as their primary communication methods. The matrices are ready." Day moved away from the holographic display, his tentacles curling with satisfaction. This should be a routine integration. Their technology level suggests they'll be suitably impressed by our capabilities, and their military forces are negligible. The standard Protectorate offer should be sufficient. As they prepared for departure, Kai spoke up hesitantly. "Sir, there's one anomaly in the data you might want to review. Their historical records show an unusual focus on military conflict, and—" Yes, Day interrupted, waving a tentacle dismissively. "Many primitive species have violent histories. That's precisely why the Protectorate system exists, to guide them toward a more civilized existence." The massive diplomatic vessel Eternal Wisdom began powering up its quantum drives, its sleek crystalline hull gleaming under the station's lights. At over 3 kilometers long, it was designed to impress developing civilizations while demonstrating the Council's peaceful intentions. Day settled into his command chair, feeling pleased with himself. "Send the standard approach signal. Let's show these humans how a proper spacefaring civilization conducts itself." As the Eternal Wisdom prepared to enter quantum space, none of its crew realized They were about to encounter a species that would shake the foundations of galactic society. They couldn't know that humans, far from being primitive, had developed their technology along completely different lines focused on survival rather than elegance. Day's career had been built on his ability to accurately assess new civilizations, but in his 300 years of service, he had never encountered a species that designed their ships to fight while on fire, that built redundant systems for their redundant systems, or that considered the ability to continue fighting while catastrophically damaged as a basic design requirement. The eternal wisdom jumped to quantum space, its crystal hull shimmering with energy. Behind them, the holographic display of Earth's solar system continued to rotate slowly, its seemingly primitive vessels hiding capabilities that would soon shock the entire galaxy. Little did Administrator Dan know that his carefully planned first contact mission would lead to the greatest reassessment of military doctrine in Council history, and that his name would be forever associated with one of the most significant miscalculations in galactic diplomacy. Chief Military Observer J sat in his dimly lit analysis chamber aboard the Council research vessel Starlight Seeker, his normally steady hands trembling as he reviewed the historical footage for the 5th time. The holographic display showed an ancient human naval battle, with a vessel called U.S. Samuel B. Roberts continuing to fight despite catastrophic damage that should have sent it to the bottom of their ocean. "Play the next sequence," he commanded, and the display shifted to another conflict, this time showing something they called a tank, a ground combat vehicle that continued operating even after losing half its components. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Captain Sung entered the chamber carrying fresh data crystals. She noticed G's troubled expression immediately. "Sir, I've brought the analysis of their space combat exercises. You're not going to like what we found." G gestured for her to continue while keeping his eyes fixed on the display. The scene now showed a modern human space vessel, the UES Normandy, during a training exercise. The ship had deliberately vented atmosphere from 3 decks, shut down its main power core, and was operating on backup systems, all while maintaining combat effectiveness. Their disaster drills. Sung began, her scales shifting to a deeper blue with concern. They're not just practicing for system failures. They're practicing for simultaneous catastrophic failures of multiple critical systems. And they're good at it. G finally turned away from the display, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of deep disturbance in his species. "Show me the comparison data with our own vessels." Sung activated her data pad, projecting a new set of statistics into the air. Standard Council military doctrine calls for a ship to retreat when any critical system is damaged beyond 40%. Human vessels. She paused, double-checking the numbers. They have documented cases of ships fighting at 85% damage. "Impossible," G muttered, but he knew the data wouldn't lie. "What about their civilian vessels?" "That's even more disturbing, sir. Their commercial ships have hidden military-grade backup systems. We found evidence that even their mining vessels are built to withstand combat conditions." The chamber fell silent as Jai processed this information. On the display, historical footage continued playing. Ships burning but fighting, vehicles operating with critical damage, crews trained to function in conditions that most species would consider unsurvivable. "Look at this," G said, highlighting a section of historical data. "Earth year 1944. A human naval vessel took torpedo hits that flooded half its compartments. By our standards, it should have surrendered or sunk. Instead, they sealed the flooded sections, rerouted power through backup systems, and continued fighting for another 3 hours." Some scales rippled with unease. "Sir, I've been analyzing their engineering principles. They don't just build redundant systems, they build redundant systems capable of operating independently. If a human ship loses its main computer, the backup doesn't just maintain life support, it maintains combat capability." Jed pulled up the design specifications for a standard Council warship. "Our ships are built for efficiency and power. We assume that a critically damaged vessel will retreat for repairs." He then overlaid the schematic of a human vessel. "But they They build their ships expecting them to be damaged. Every system has multiple backups. Every critical component can be bypassed. Every power conduit has alternate routing. There's more, Sung added, her voice dropping lower. Their crew training programs. They regularly practice scenarios where they lose life support, atmosphere, gravity, and main power, all at once. And they consider this normal. Jay reached for his communication panel, then hesitated. How could he explain this to the council? How could he make them understand that they weren't dealing with a primitive species, but rather one that had developed along a completely different path? "Captain," he said finally, "prepare a full report. Include all historical examples, design analyses, and training protocols. The council needs to understand. These humans don't just build ships to win battles. They build them to survive scenarios that we haven't even considered possible." As Sung left to prepare the report, Ji turned back to the historical footage. A new sequence showed a human space station deliberately depressurizing multiple sections to contain a fire, its crew continuing to function in emergency suits as if this were a routine occurrence. "They're not primitive at all," he whispered to himself. "They're just prepared for things we've never had to face." The implications made his skin crawl. If this was how humans approached routine operations, what would their actual warships be capable of when pushed to their limits? The answer to that question would soon reshape galactic military doctrine forever, but for now, Jay could only watch the footage with growing amazement and concern. These humans didn't just plan for victory. They planned for survival under conditions that most species would consider the end of combat operations. And somehow, they made it work. Technical Inspector Kim walked slowly through the massive engine room of the UES Indomitable, his scanner beeping constantly as it detected yet another system that violated standard galactic engineering protocols. The human crew members continued their duties around him, seemingly oblivious to the fact that they were working next to what his instruments insisted were multiple catastrophic safety hazards. "This can't be right," he muttered, tapping the scanner against his palm. The device was showing power conduits running parallel to backup conduits, which ran parallel to emergency conduits, which somehow connected to a fourth system that shouldn't even exist. According to basic physics, this arrangement should cause dangerous power feedback loops. Yet somehow, it worked. Commander Lee floated down from an upper level, her magnetic boots engaging with a soft click as she landed beside him. "Finding everything you need, Inspector Kim." Kim looked up from his scanner, all three of his eyes blinking in sequence. "Commander, I must point out that your engine configuration violates at least 15 standard safety protocols. These power routings alone." He gestured at the complex web of conduits above them. "Ah, you're looking at our redundancy grid," Lee said with a smile. "Would you like to see it in action?" "Chief Williams, run test sequence Delta 7. Before Kim could protest, warning lights began flashing. He watched in horror as the main power conduits shut down, expecting the ship's systems to fail. Instead, power instantly rerouted through the secondary systems. Then those failed too, and the tertiary systems engaged seamlessly. "Stop," Kim shouted as the emergency lights kicked in. "Your ship is experiencing cascading system failures." Lee's smile widened. "No, Inspector. This is a standard training exercise. Watch." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, rerouting power through systems that Kim's training told him couldn't possibly exist. They sealed imaginary hull breaches while maintaining full power to weapon systems. They compensated for simulated atmospheric loss while keeping the engines at combat readiness. "This is impossible," Kim whispered, his professional composure cracking. "You're running combat operations with multiple critical systems offline. The energy requirements alone." "Would you like to see the reactor room?" Lee asked innocently. "We have some interesting solutions for power generation under extreme conditions." Kim followed her through the corridors, his scanner working overtime to process the violations of engineering principles he'd studied for decades. They passed damage control teams practicing repairs in sealed suits, crews running emergency protocols that assumed multiple simultaneous disasters, and engineers casually maintaining systems that should have been mutually exclusive. "Here we are," Lee announced as they entered the reactor control room. "This is where it gets really interesting." Kim's scanner actually shut down when he tried to analyze the reactor configuration. He reset it 3 times before giving up. "You have 4 separate containment systems, and independent cooling for each one. The power requirements for maintaining all these redundant systems must be enormous." 5 containment systems, actually, Lee corrected. The 5th one is integrated into the hull structure itself. And yes, it takes a lot of power. That's why we have multiple reactor types that can operate independently or in concert. A young engineer approached with a data pad. "Commander, we're ready to run the reactor isolation drill." "Excellent. Inspector Kim, you might want to watch this. We're going to simulate a complete failure of the primary reactor system." Before Kim could object, alarms blared throughout the ship. He watched in amazement as the crew calmly switched to secondary power, then tertiary, then to systems his instruments couldn't even classify. The ship maintained full combat readiness throughout the entire exercise. "This isn't just redundancy," Kim said finally, his professional training warring with what he was witnessing. "You're not just building backup systems, you're building entire backup ships within the same hull." Lee nodded. "When you're light years from the nearest repair facility and someone starts shooting at you, you can't afford to rely on a single system for anything. Every critical component has to have multiple backups, and those backups need backups." Kim looked down at his useless scanner, then at the organized chaos of the human engine room. "Your entire engineering philosophy. It goes against everything we teach about efficient design and power management." "Efficiency is good," Lee agreed, "but survival is better. We learned that lesson the hard way over centuries of warfare. A ship that surrenders when its main reactor fails isn't much use in a real fight." As Kim prepared his report for the Galactic Council, he struggled to find words to explain what he'd seen. How could he describe a civilization that built warships expecting them to be nearly destroyed in battle? How could he explain crew members who trained to fight while their ship was literally falling apart around them? The implications were clear, but they were implications that would shake the foundations of galactic military doctrine. Humans hadn't just developed different technology. They'd developed a completely different understanding of what it meant to build a warship. They didn't just prepare for battle. They prepared for survival under conditions that most species would consider unsurvivable. As he wrote his report, Kim couldn't help but wonder. If this was a light cruiser, what were their actual battleships capable of? Security analyst Song watched the training exercise footage for the 20th time, her hands shaking as she documented yet another example of human ships defying what should have been certain destruction. On her holoscreen, the UES Defiant continued maneuvering and firing despite having lost 70% of its hull integrity, 3 engines, and its main reactor. The observation room around her was silent except for the soft hum of data processors and her own rapid breathing. Scattered across multiple screens were similar scenes, human vessels operating in conditions that violated every principle of space combat she had ever studied. Director Park entered the room, his normally immaculate uniform showing signs of hurried dressing. "Show me," he commanded without preamble. Psalm pulled up her primary findings. "Sir, this was supposed to be a standard evaluation of human military capabilities. But what we've discovered..." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "Look at this training scenario." The main screen showed a human destroyer, the UES Thunderchild, conducting what they called a survival drill. The ship's crew had deliberately deactivated their main power, vented atmosphere from multiple decks, and were operating with severe structural damage, all while maintaining combat effectiveness. "How are they still fighting?" Park asked, his professional composure slipping. "Those damage levels should have triggered automatic surrender protocols." "That's just it, sir," Song replied, pulling up more data. "They don't have surrender protocols. Their combat doctrine assumes they'll have to fight while critically damaged. Look at this. They practice situations where they lose life support, main power, and hull integrity simultaneously. Park leaned closer to the display, his eyes widening. Those conditions are unsurvivable. For our ships, yes. But the humans. Song brought up another recording. This is their cadet training program. They deliberately create these conditions and teach their crews how to function in them. They call it damage control training, but it's beyond anything we've ever conceived. The footage showed human crew members sealing hull breaches while in combat, rerouting power through systems that shouldn't have existed, and maintaining weapon accuracy despite their ships being literally torn apart around them. This ship, Song highlighted a particular vessel, lost its bridge, engineering section, and primary computer core. According to all known combat doctrine, it should have been dead in space. Instead, the crew sealed off the damaged sections, switched to backup systems we didn't even know existed, and continued fighting from an emergency command center. Director Park sank into a chair, his face pale. How many backup systems do they have? We don't know, Song admitted. Every time we think we've identified all their redundancies, they reveal another layer. They don't just have backup systems. They have backup systems for their backup systems, and emergency protocols for when those fail too. She brought up a comparison diagram. Look at this. A standard Council warship has one main reactor and one backup. This human light cruiser has 3 main reactors, 4 backup systems, and something they call an emergency fusion core that can power critical systems even if everything else fails. This violates every principle of efficient ship design, Park muttered. Yes, sir, but it works. Their ships keep fighting long after our models say they should be destroyed. And their crews. Song pulled up crew training records. They practice these scenarios constantly. They treat catastrophic damage as a normal operating condition. Park was silent for a long moment, studying the data. The Council needs to see this immediately. If these are their training exercises, what are their actual combat capabilities? Song nodded grimly. There's more, sir. We've detected similar design philosophies in their civilian vessels. Their mining ships have military-grade backup systems. Their cargo vessels have hidden armor and weapon mounts. Even their space stations are built to continue functioning after taking massive damage. They're not just building warships, Park realized. They're building an entire civilization around the assumption that everything might have to fight while falling apart. As they prepared the report for the Council, both analysts knew they were documenting something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans hadn't just developed resilient ships. They'd created an entire military doctrine based on refusing to die. The implications were staggering. How do you defeat an enemy whose ships keep fighting long after they should have been destroyed? How do you handle a species that treats catastrophic damage as just another tactical challenge to overcome? The answer would soon reshape galactic warfare forever, but for now, Song could only continue documenting the incredible resilience of human engineering and the unshakable determination of their crews to keep fighting no matter what. The Crimson Blade pirate fleet dropped out of hyperspace in a perfect ambush formation. 6 heavily armed raiders surrounded what appeared to be a slow, lumbering human cargo vessel. Their scanners showed minimal defenses and a standard merchant crew complement. The Pacific trader was just another fat target in the shipping lanes. Pirate Commander Vex neared at the transport's profile on his tactical display. Another primitive human vessel. They don't even have proper shield generators. He opened a comm channel to his fleet. Disable their engines and prepare boarding parties. Let's make this quick. On the bridge of the Pacific trader, Captain Han sat calmly in her command chair, watching the pirates take position around her ship. Her first officer, Lieutenant Park, maintained an equally relaxed demeanor as he monitored the tactical display. They've taken the bait, Captain, Park reported. All 6 vessels are within optimal range. Let them make the first move, Hyun replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. We wouldn't want to spoil the surprise. The first pirate shot streaked across space, aimed at the Pacific trader's engines. Instead of impacting the hull, They splashed harmlessly against shields that shouldn't have existed. Commander Vex blinked in confusion as his tactical officer reported shield strengths far beyond any civilian vessel's capabilities. Impossible, Vex muttered. Their power readings were minimal. He keyed his comm again. All ships, concentrate fire. Those shields can't last. Before he could finish the order, the Pacific trader's hull began to transform. Armored panels slid aside, revealing rows of point defense turrets. Weapon ports appeared where cargo doors should have been. The helpless transport had become a bristling fortress. "This is Captain Hyun of the Pacific Trader." Her voice rang across all frequencies. "We've been hunting you for weeks. Thank you for taking the bait." Her tone carried the kind of confidence that only came from absolute certainty. This is how humans handle pirates. The Pacific Trader's first salvo caught 2 pirate ships completely by surprise. Military-grade plasma cannons, far more powerful than anything a merchant should have possessed, reduced one raider to molten debris. The second ship's shields collapsed under a barrage of missiles that emerged from hidden launchers. Impossible. Vex screamed as his tactical display filled with new weapon signatures. "It's a trap. All ships, retreat." But retreat was no longer an option. The Pacific Trader moved with surprising speed and agility, its engines revealing their true power. More hidden weapons emerged from its hull, each system showing the characteristic over-engineering that humans were becoming known for. "Sir," his tactical officer shouted, "they're using military-grade targeting systems. Their accuracy shouldn't be possible with a merchant crew." Hyun's voice came again, this time directed specifically at Vex. "Did you really think we'd leave our trading vessels defenseless? Every human merchant ship is built to fight if necessary. We just prefer not to advertise it." The battle was devastatingly one-sided. The Pacific Trader's point defense grid shredded incoming fire, while its main weapons systematically disabled the pirate vessels. When Vex tried to ram the transport in desperation, he discovered that its hull was far stronger than any civilian ship had a right to be. "Engineering reports all systems functioning normally," Captain Park announced with professional pride. "Our hidden reactors are maintaining full power to weapons and shields." "Excellent," Hyun replied. "Signal the nearest patrol vessel. Tell them we have some prisoners for processing." She turned to her communications officer. "And make sure all combat footage is transmitted to Council Security. They should find this educational." As the last pirate ship surrendered, news of the battle was already spreading across subspace channels. The Crimson Blades, terror of the shipping lanes, had been completely defeated by a single human transport. In the aftermath, inspectors would discover that the Pacific Trader was far from unique. Every human merchant vessel carried similar hidden defenses, each one built with the same philosophy that made their warships so formidable: multiple redundant systems, overwhelming firepower, and the ability to continue fighting long after sustaining critical damage. When asked later about the battle, Captain Hyun would simply shrug and say, "We're merchants, not warriors. But on Earth, we learned long ago that being peaceful doesn't mean being helpless. Every human ship is built to survive the impossible, because sooner or later, the impossible happens." The galaxy would never look at human ships the same way again. Behind their bulky and elegant designs lay military-grade systems that could transform a simple merchant vessel into a fortress. It wasn't just their warships that were built to exceed every safety margin. It was every ship that bore the name of Earth. Council member Min paced the ornate chamber of the Galactic Security Council, his ceremonial robes swishing against the polished floor. The holographic display showed the Pacific Trader incident from multiple angles, each view revealing new aspects of human engineering that defied conventional understanding. "Play it again," he commanded, and the scene reset. The massive transport vessel, initially appearing harmless, transformed into a bristling fortress of weapons and shields. The pirate fleet's destruction played out in perfect clarity, their weapons useless against defenses that shouldn't have existed on a civilian ship. Senior Analyst Yoon entered the chamber, carrying fresh data crystals. Sir, we've completed our analysis of human merchant vessel specifications. You need to see this immediately. Min gestured to the central display, and new schematics appeared alongside the battle footage. Explain. Every human merchant ship follows the same pattern. Yoon began, highlighting various systems: hidden weapon mounts, military-grade shield generators, reinforced hull plating that exceeds warship specifications. The Pacific Trader wasn't special, it was standard. The assembled council members murmured in disbelief. Admiral Ta stood up from his seat. Impossible. The power requirements alone would make such vessels too expensive to operate commercially. That's what we thought, Yoon replied, bringing up engine schematics. But look at their power distribution systems. Multiple redundant reactors, each capable of operating independently. They've solved the efficiency problem by simply overwhelming it with raw engineering. Min stopped pacing, his attention caught by a particular detail. Those reactor configurations, they're similar to what we've seen in their warships. No, sir, Yoon said grimly. These are primitive compared to their military vessels. We've begun analyzing their actual warship capabilities, and she paused, collecting herself. Sir, we need to completely rewrite our threat assessment protocols. The chamber's lights dimmed as new tactical displays appeared. Side-by-side comparisons showed human vessels surviving damage that would have destroyed any other known ship. Combat footage revealed layers of defensive systems that seemed to multiply rather than fail under attack. They don't just build redundancy into their ships, Min realized aloud. They build entire backup ships within the same hull. Every system, every component, is designed to continue functioning long after our models say it should have failed. And that's just what we can detect, Yoon added. After the Pacific Trader incident, we've had to assume that every human vessel has capabilities we haven't discovered yet. Admiral Ta leaned forward in his seat. What about their actual warships? If their merchants are this well armed? Yoon's expression grew even more serious. Sir, we've been analyzing their military exercises. Their warships routinely operate under conditions that our simulations classify as unsurvivable. They don't just train for victory. They train for continued operation after catastrophic damage. Min returned to the original battle footage. Look at how that merchant crew responded. No panic, no hesitation. They were prepared for this. Because they expected, Yoon explained. Human military doctrine assumes that every ship, military or civilian, might have to fight while critically damaged. They don't just plan for best-case scenarios. They plan for the worst possible conditions and then figure out how to keep fighting anyway. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Their entire understanding of space combat was based on the assumption that ships would retreat when critically damaged. The humans had developed an entirely different approach, one that assumed survival and continued combat effectiveness were possible under any conditions. We need to completely reassess our military doctrine, Min announced finally. Everything we thought we knew about ship design, about combat tactics, about crew training. It all needs to be reconsidered in light of this. The Pacific Trader incident continued playing on the main display, a stark reminder that they were dealing with a species that approached space combat in ways they had never imagined. If a simple merchant vessel could defeat an entire pirate fleet, what were their warships truly capable of? The answer would reshape galactic military thinking forever, but for now, the Council could only watch and wonder at a civilization that built every ship, from the humblest transport to the mightiest warship, to survive the impossible. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council glowed with the soft light of 1,000 floating orbs as diplomatic liaison Yoon approached the central podium. 5 years had passed since humanity's first contact with the galactic community, and the changes they had brought were visible everywhere. From the reinforced construction of the chamber itself to the multiple backup systems humming quietly in the background. Honored council members, Yoon began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. 5 years ago, your predecessors sat in these same seats and classified Earth as a developing civilization in need of guidance. Today, I stand before you to present evidence of how deeply that assessment has changed. The main holographic display activated, showing a split view of modern galactic shipyards. On one side, traditional sleek vessels of the Council races took shape. On the other, new designs emerged, incorporating human engineering principles that would have been dismissed as excessive just a few years ago. The Regellian Empire's newest cruiser class, Yoon highlighted one of the ships, now incorporates triple redundant power systems inspired by human designs. The Centaurian Federation has redesigned their entire merchant fleet with hidden defense capabilities. Even the Andromedans, known for their minimalist engineering, have begun adding backup systems to their backup systems. Council Elder Park leaned forward in his seat, and what of the human influence on crew training protocols? Yoon changed the display to show various military academies across the galaxy. Damage control drills that were once considered extreme are now standard practice. Crews trained to fight their ships while systems are failing, while hulls are breached, while life support is compromised. What we once considered impossible scenarios are now routine exercises. The chamber filled with murmurs as various council members recognized their own species' training programs. The changes were undeniable. Every major spacefaring race had begun adopting human survival doctrine to some degree. But perhaps the most significant change, Yoon continued, has been in our understanding of what constitutes a defeated vessel. 5 years ago, a ship with major system damage was expected to surrender or retreat. Today, she paused, allowing the next images to appear. Ships of various species continuing to fight despite devastating damage. Admiral Chen spoke up from his seat. Our casualty rates in pirate encounters have dropped by 60% since implementing human-inspired redundancy systems. Ships that would once have been lost are now returning to base, damaged but alive. Exactly, Yoon agreed. We've learned that survival isn't just about building stronger ships. It's about building ships that refuse to die even when critically damaged. The humans didn't just show us new technology. They showed us a new way of thinking about space combat. The display shifted to show the Pacific Trader incident, now legendary throughout the galaxy. The merchant vessel's transformation from apparent helpless target to combat-capable defender had become a standard training video in every space academy. What we once considered paranoid over-engineering, Yoon explained, we now recognize as practical survival doctrine. Every human vessel, from the smallest mining ship to the largest battlecruiser, is built with the assumption that it might have to fight while falling apart. And now, increasingly, so are ours. She gestured to the latest statistics. Trade route attacks are down 70%. Piracy has become significantly less profitable now that merchant ships across the galaxy carry hidden defenses. Even civilian vessels routinely survive encounters that would have destroyed them 5 years ago. The council chamber was silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't just joined the galactic community. They had fundamentally changed how it approached space travel and combat. In conclusion, Yoon stated, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn, humanity's influence extends far beyond mere technology. They've taught us that survival doesn't mean avoiding damage. It means continuing to function even when critically damaged. They've shown us that victory isn't just about overwhelming force. It's about refusing to accept defeat under any circumstances. As Yoon concluded her presentation, the chamber erupted in discussion. The new normal was clear. Humanity's approach to ship design and combat doctrine had become the standard against which all others were measured. Their philosophy of building redundancy into everything, of preparing for the worst possible scenarios, had spread throughout the galaxy. The age of elegant but vulnerable ships was over. The future belonged to vessels that could take a beating and keep fighting, crewed by people trained to operate under conditions that would once have been considered impossible. Humanity hadn't just joined galactic civilization. They had fundamentally reshaped it in their image. And somewhere out in space, countless ships now carried the legacy of that change. Hidden weapons, backup systems, and crews trained to survive the impossible, all because one species had never learned to accept defeat as final.